Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Local Stack Community Meetup. It's great to be with you again this month. My name is Brian, and I lead developer relations here at Local Stack. We've got two great speakers coming up today, so I'm really excited. This is kind of I think the first time in a while, maybe, or ever, since that we've had two guest speakers. We've got um, Malcolm from Terrateam and John from Workbrew, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them in just a moment. All right, so again, this this is the agenda for today. You're already in the intro and welcome. So welcome. We have two great sessions. First up, we're going to have John uh, talking about security at speed, which is basically about like how you can keep your cloud access secure by working locally. We will be doing Q&A after each session, so we hope that you will participate in those. And then the second session, we're going to be talking about a new tool, open source tool from Terrateam that allows you to actually estimate your cloud costs based on a Terraform config file. So that I'm also super excited to hear about. So really great talks. This is, as always, like besides the meetup, this is always a busy week at Local Stack because somehow or another we align and we end up having the meetup on the same week as our release. Our release is coming, 4.3 is coming tomorrow. I don't have a slide about that because you'll find out more about that on our blog, but I just want to make sure you know. Check out tomorrow for the latest updates for our 4.3 release, which will be posted to our blog at blog.localstack.cloud. All right, so moving on. Again, this is the intro. Want to also introduce a couple of our speakers here. We've got Malcolm and John. I want to invite them on screen, and we are going to do some introduction. So, Malcolm, you said you're joining from Amsterdam.
You got it.
And John's joining us all the way from Valencia, Spain. And here I am in a weirdly empty room in Orlando, Florida for the moment. But yeah, I want to kind of turn it over to you to introduce yourselves. First up, I'll turn it over to Malcolm since you're right to my immediate right on screen.
Hey, I'm Malcolm. I'm co-founder and CTO of Terrateam, and we do GitOps for pretty much anything infrastructure as code. In particular, that's Terraform and OpenTofu. And I think something special about the company is we choose really weird technology. So the whole thing's written in OCaml, which you may or may not have heard of, and it works out great for us.
That's really interesting. The only reason I know of OCaml is like a random story. There was um, I was interviewing with LaunchDarkly where I worked before. This was a number of years ago, and LaunchDarkly gave me this assignment to integrate LaunchDarkly with OCaml as
That's
my
quite the
homework
assignment.
for during. Yes, which was really interesting because I mean
Did they not want to
I don't
hire
know
you?
OCaml. I passed. I got hired. So and that was the first and last time I've ever used OCaml.
All right, well, it's a wonderful language. I love it. Terrateam's implemented in it, and so is the tool I'm going to talk about today, OpenInfraQuote.
Cool. All right. Excited to hear that. All right, John.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. My name's John. I am co-founder and CEO of Workbrew. We build an enterprise kind of managed version of Homebrew, the open source package manager popular on Mac OS. If you're not familiar with Homebrew, it's installed on close to 30 million devices, has something like 15,000 packages. There are thousands of maintainers. It's been around for about 15 years, and it's widely used by developers everywhere. When we started the company, we went out and we spoke with lots of different folks about what problems and challenges they faced with Homebrew. And we heard over and over again the same things. I have no idea what's going on these devices. I don't have any way to manage them. I don't have consistency. And I need to put some kind of security and compliance guardrails in place. And so we built Workbrew as kind of a multiplayer version of Homebrew. And so, yeah, that's what I'll be talking about today, and a little bit about how my opinions towards local development are quite strong, and I think that most of us here probably share the same opinion as well.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I use work. Sorry. homebrew all the time. I think, and I've never really, I don't know, this idea that developers might install packages or dependencies without really considering what's in them. Come on, you got
Yeah.
app and does it. All right. Well, I'm excited to hear both of your presentations. So we will get to that in a moment, but first I want to make sure that all of you can participate because we are going to have these great talks and the speakers are here live so they can answer your questions. You can ask your questions over on slido.com. You just enter that code, put your questions as they're presenting, and we will be sure to add them and ask them to each presenter at the end of each session. So again, go ahead and scan that QR code, open that page so you can ask your questions live of our speakers. And with that, we will actually begin our first session. So I'm going to welcome John back on screen to give us his opinions on local development and homebrew and all of that.
Yep. So thank you so much, Brian. It's great to be here. So today I'm going to be talking about unblocking developers and staying secure. And kind of the crux of this talk is about the benefits of doing things locally. So when I was talking to the team at LocalStack, we were talking about different ideas of how we could kind of find a relation between what we're doing at Workbrew and kind of what LocalStack is doing. And this is kind of where we landed. So just in terms of agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about Homebrew, what it is, how you can find it, how you use it, a little bit about Workbrew, and then we'll talk about unblocking developers and security. And then I'll give a demo of some of the core features of Workbrew that are kind of relevant to your interests in this area, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. So with that, let's just get started. So as I mentioned in the intro before, my name is John. I'm a co-founder of Workbrew. I have two other co-founders, Vanessa and Mike. The three of us worked together at GitHub for quite a while. Mike, our CTO, is also the project leader of Homebrew. He's been involved in that project for close to 15 years. So we're the team with a ton of experience in Homebrew and package management. So let's talk about Homebrew. What is Homebrew? The simplest way to describe Homebrew is to say it's an app store for developers. It's an open source project with a community of thousands of contributors. I would say that on Mac OS, it's become the industry standard package manager. And I couldn't imagine working on a Mac without using Homebrew to install all my developer dependencies and other software. So it looks something like this. You just open up your terminal and you type in brew install and whatever you want to install, and you can actually install LocalStack using brew as well. So just go open up your terminal, get brew installed, and then get LocalStack for some local development. There are close to 15,000 packages in the Homebrew package manager. That includes open source software that's distributed as source code that Homebrew builds for you and installs. But it also includes closed source software like desktop applications, drivers, fonts, and things like that. And a somewhat unknown feature or lesser known feature of Homebrew is that you can actually use it to install arbitrary software, whatever you want. So it's kind of like there's two components. There's the library of software provided, and there's the infrastructure for installing the software. And so you can actually create your own internal tools or software packages and distribute them using the Brew infrastructure as well. Homebrew is everywhere. It's trusted by tens of billions of developers. It's multi-platform as well. So for consistency between CI and CD and local development and production, you can actually use Brew on Linux to end up with all the same dependencies and kind of the same experience across your CI development and production environments. But there are some limitations to Homebrew. So as it was originally imagined, it was essentially a single player design. So the idea is that a developer has their machine. They have a Mac desktop, a Mac laptop, and they would install Homebrew and then use it to install whatever they want on their devices. And they would configure it however they like. And as you add more and more people to the team, there's no repeatability, there's no visibility into what's going on, and there's really no kind of best practice or system for making sure people stay kind of in the same lane. So what can you do about that? Well, we've seen kind of three main patterns of solving these problems. The first is to just do nothing. Everybody uses Brew, everybody knows they use Brew, but we just kind of look the other way and let it be. The second kind of popular option is what we call informed trust. So companies develop some policies. Maybe they write a README for onboarding, and they say you should install these packages and not those packages, and how to configure your system and what settings are important. But really, there's no way to automate or enforce those decisions across a team. And then the last, least popular and most expensive option is to build your own system on top of Homebrew to manage this stuff. And I've spoken to lots of the big tech companies, and many of them essentially take this path. They take the open source Homebrew project, they fork it, they customize it to their needs, and then they have an entire team internally that manages Homebrew for them so that they can meet their security and compliance guidelines, and they can also have a good developer experience within their company. So none of these are really good solutions. And so that's where Workbrew comes in, and we're kind of building a solution for this. So in short, it's an enterprise-ready version of Homebrew. It's all the tools that developers love for local development, working on their machines, getting their dependencies and everything up and running. But it's also trusted by security. It's something that they know is safe and that they can manage, and they can see what's going on within their environment. So broadly, there are a few different categories of functionality in the product. The first is developer productivity. So the idea being that how can we get developers up and running as quickly as possible? Can we give them repeatable environments, standardized processes? How can we make it a little bit more collaborative so that when one developer makes a change, it's available to others? So this is really kind of taking Homebrew and supercharging it for a team. This also involves things like automated deployment, so that when a new person joins the company, we can get this out to them and get their environments up and running really easily. The next big area is analytics and observability. The biggest thing that I hear from IT and security staff when it comes to managing their fleet and talking about local development and what's going on the endpoint is that they don't know what they don't know. Everybody's using Homebrew. They don't know what packages are there. They don't know what's vulnerable. They don't know what versions are installed or if it's been updated. And so we provide a way for folks to see everything that's going on, get a full inventory, all version information of all the packages across the entire fleet. And then remote management, so the ability to install packages, upgrade packages, patch things, and set kind of configuration. And then lastly, it's security and compliance. Probably the biggest thing that we hear from customers is that they use our vulnerability scanning and vulnerability alerting to just make sure things are up to date and everybody's safe. So we keep kind of tabs on all the packages installed across your company and alert you when things need to be updated for security reasons. So those are some of the benefits to Workbrew and how you can kind of use it in your company. But I want to talk a bit about this idea of local development and unblocking developers so that we can really kind of get into a little bit more specifics. So the first thing is that when we talk about a local developer environment or just a developer environment in general, there are a handful of problems that everybody sets out to solve. And sometimes they're solved bespoke within a company with internal tools. So for example, I previously worked at GitHub. When I was at GitHub, we had a bunch of internal tooling built around setting up laptops, getting the dependencies installed, making sure the dependencies were up to date. And we had an entire team, it was called the Friction team, that was focused on this problem. And, the main challenges here are things like it's slow to get people onboarded. Once they're onboarded, it's hard to manage, what a shared environment looks like. So if somebody wants to make a change, how is that propagated across all systems in a timely fashion? And how is it kept consistent? Ultimately, the goal is that we want developers to have the tools that they need to move faster and have a very simple way to understand what's going on. So really, these are problems that there are a lot of different solutions for, from bespoke solutions to products available on the market. And very frequently, when I'm talking to folks about this problem of, development environments and having a good flow for new joiners to a company and whatnot, we come across some of these options. The first and most obvious, easy solution is let's just virtualize everything, have an entire copy of an operating system, and it will be perfectly consistent every single time that we restart it. But it has drawbacks. It's heavy, it takes a lot of memory, it kills your battery life if you're on a mobile device, and it's just generally kind of clunky. Then come along containers, and I feel like this is less. It's very good for consistent rollout to production systems, but as a developer working on my machine, I find containers to be just too complex. They're an added layer of knowledge that I need to have. Every new person who joins my team, I need to train them on how containers work. I need to help them with orchestrating their containers. I need to, keep their container environments up to date, all kinds of stuff like that. And I just find that it's something that adds a lot of complexity and isn't really the best solution to the problem of having a really efficient, nice developer environment. And then, the cloud IDE solution comes up quite a lot as well, in that it's consistent. Every single time you start it up, it's the same. When you make changes, they're shared across the entire team, and it's easy to get started. And there are a lot of things to love about cloud IDEs. There are a lot of things to love about all of these, but ultimately, they all have their problems in that, as a developer, I'm most comfortable locally. I'm most comfortable on my machine with my configuration settings, with my dot files, with my keyboard shortcuts, with my editor, with my networking settings, with my disk settings. And it's just not ergonomic to use these solutions. So what I want to make the case for here is that, as a developer, local development is ergonomic, and we should really strive to deliver that experience as much as we can. You know, it's really simple to say, hey, you have your machine, install something. It's familiar. You have all of your environment set up the way you like it. You don't have to learn new things. You don't have to, be subject to another person on your team's configuration settings. Disk and network work the way you expect. For me, this is one of the biggest challenges. Is if I'm working in a containerized environment and I have multiple different containers talking to each other, and I've got these complex networking setups, it can be a time sink to have to debug that stuff. And working locally, it just works as you'd expect, because it's a native network environment, native disk environment. With the native disk environment as well, all of your tools work as you'd expect. Your command line works with all your terminal customizations. Your editor works with all of your editor customizations. It's just more comfortable. And that's not even to mention the fact that performance is a big factor here as well. Running natively on your device is faster than running in in a virtualized environment, in a containerized environment, or in a cloud environment. Especially in the cloud, it's what's the response time, what's the lag, are there any latency issues? For me, it's even a small portion of time of introduced lag can cause challenges. And lastly, I think that local development is also a cost conscious thing to do. So we're talking about, in this case, a lot of folks using very expensive Apple devices that are very powerful, have a lot of power in those Apple Silicon chips, a lot of memory on the device, and it comes at a pretty high cost. And especially when it comes to cloud environments, I find it very difficult to make the case that paying additional money on top of a very expensive Apple device to use a per minute, per second time consumption cloud environment that is less ergonomic, I just find that to be a very hard sell. And so I really emphasize, how can we do more things locally? And so, local stack obviously has the value proposition of being able to, have all of your development locally without relying on a cloud environment to do testing and whatnot. You kind of emulate that locally. And for us, it's really, Homebrew as a package manager is like a native package manager in Mac OS. It installs all the things on your device. It's not in some kind of containerized environment or virtualized environment. So everything just works the way you would expect. And so, with Workbrew, we're trying to emphasize this local ergonomic developer environment as well. So I want to talk a little bit about how this has security implications as well. So overall, we talked about this being a better developer experience. But at the same time, it's also giving you security benefits. So for example, you're getting a better developer experience for your developers when they have faster onboarding, but you're also benefiting from the fact that onboarding doesn't have security implications. You're not giving access. You're not waiting for tickets, with your IT team to get people added and provisioned and all that stuff. They have access to their hardware, and they have access to what they need to do to get their jobs. So this is also a security benefit in that you don't need to give unnecessary access to people, whether it's in a test environment, a dev environment, or a production environment in some cases. You can really limit this. Additionally, CI and CD environments. When you're doing testing and continuous deployment, if your environment setup requires a third-party access, whether it's a cloud environment or it's some kind of other tooling, you're introducing potential security risk for not that much value. So for a developer, the experience is better when CI works just like the local environment. And so what we're able to achieve with this kind of local oriented developer environments is to say you're able to do things locally. They work as you'd expect in a native and ergonomic environment. But then also when you push to your source control and you run CI, it will run all the same stuff. So it's a better developer experience. But also CI doesn't have access to sensitive stuff. It's all happening within the CI. Similarly with approvals, if you need access to some kind of third-party tooling, you might need to go through some bureaucracy in your organization. The bigger your organization is, the more bureaucracy you're probably going to encounter. And so it's a better developer experience to not need approval. And it's also a more secure outcome. You don't have to give access to folks. And then, lastly, spending. Like with you doing things locally, you're able to limit and minimize the risk of arbitrary increased cloud spend. So this isn't just it costs money to run servers for testing, but if you're working in development and you've ever had like a loop go off the rails or some long running job that you forgot about, you could be spending lots of money in the cloud by accident. And that's not something that you want to even take the risk for. And you can minimize that risk while also improving the developer experience by doing local kind of ergonomic development. And then kind of on the improved just security front, not just on the developer experience, but you can increase the availability of your products to more people. So you don't need to get additional access requests or whatnot to give access to things. It's just freely available to everyone because there's no risk associated. You're able to follow the principle of least access, minimizing what's going on, who has access to what. You limit the amount of credential management you have to do. I don't know if you've ever gone through the process of setting up like an environment system where you have lots of credentials in your environment, like a 12-factor app type of situation. And a new person comes on and you're copying, pasting an environment file with dozens, if not hundreds of different credentials. If you're using a local-based development flow, you can avoid that, reducing the risk of leakage. And lastly, inevitably people leave the company. And the more areas of access that you have, the more likely it is that you're going to miss something when you offboard or they leave the company. So now what I'd like to do is just jump over to a quick demo of Workbrew and show you a bit about the product before we move into Q&A. So Workbrew has, in order to achieve this local-based development flow, there's kind of four main components. The foundation is Homebrew, the open source package manager. We use the same open source package manager as is available. We don't have a custom version or a private fork or anything like that. And the Workbrew product is built as a complement on top of Homebrew as kind of a control plane. When you install Workbrew on your devices, you get a secure CLI installed, you get an agent that connects with our console, and then you get this administrative interface, the Workbrew console. So what you can see here is our dashboard. From the dashboard, you get a summary of everything that's going on in your fleet, known vulnerabilities, outdated packages, devices, anything that's failed. Now, when we talk about those kind of main value propositions, visibility, remote management, and security and compliance, on the visibility front, you can go through and you can see all of your devices, get a summary. When you find a device you want to look into deeper, you can see every package that's installed, why it was installed, if it's up to date or not. You can upgrade it on the spot. This is useful for debugging individual use case for one person, or also for kind of auditing or responding to an incident. You can drill down on one device and see what's going on. but you can also get a kind of high-level picture of all of the packages in your company that are in use. So what's nice about this is it kind of blends the best of both worlds in that your developers have all of this stuff installed locally on their machines. They're able to work in an ergonomic fashion, but whether it's a team lead, a tech lead, or somebody in the IT or security department, you have the ability to manage this across all of the devices. So here you'll see every installed package within this workspace. So for example, you can see curl here, and it's installed on 9 devices, and you can drill down and see which devices it's installed on and get more information there. So that's kind of on the visibility front. There's a lot more in here about third-party taps, getting command analytics, licensing, but that's really kind of the meat of the visibility functionality. On the remote management functionality, this is where I think that we talked a bit about onboarding new developers into your environment. There's a functionality in Workbrew called default packages, and this is built on top of something in Homebrew called Homebrew Bundle. Homebrew Bundle is a subcommand of Brew that allows you to declaratively create a file that declares what packages need to be installed, what software needs to be installed. So in here, we might have, for example, the case of a web development team or maybe a data science team, and they're working in Python. And so we can add, like, I want to install Python, I want to install Postgres, I want to install, maybe I want to install Visual Studio Code. And then they also want to install, let's say, local stack. So you can define this brew file, which is a configuration file of all of the software that should be installed. And then you can assign it to a group. So let's say the engineers. And now what will happen is when a new device is provisioned into that group, all of the software will be installed automatically, eliminating the need for the individual developer to set up this stuff, read a README, install each package individually, and just keeping everybody up to date. In future, there's a world where this can be managed using like a GitOps flow, where there's a repository, you make a pull request, you make a change, and then this becomes available to everybody on your team automatically. So that's kind of on the remote management side. There's a little bit more around, you can run commands, you can install things, but really on the setting up environments and onboarding folks, this default packages functionality is probably the most valuable for folks that want to really lean into local development and setting up environments this way. And then the last kind of area I wanted to talk about is security and compliance. With the problems that we talked about that we're trying to solve when we're building developer environments, one of them is consistency across the world and like making sure that everybody's up to date on the latest thing. Oftentimes because of security vulnerabilities. And so if you use virtualization, you use containers, or you use cloud IDEs, it's pretty easy to consistently manage for vulnerabilities and upgrade them, patch them, make sure that they're not an issue anymore. But when you're working locally with a system package manager like Homebrew, and you don't have visibility of what's going on, it can be challenging to make sure that everything is secure and safe. So we built into Workbrew a vulnerabilities functionality where we scan every known version of every package in Brew, and we look for known vulnerabilities from a variety of different data sources. And if any of them are within your fleet, you'll get an alert. Those alerts can come via email, via Slack, via webhook, or just in the UI of the Workbrew console. And once you find a vulnerability, you can drill down and get some severity information, see what it is. But what's really nice here is that you can actually, with one click, patch the vulnerability. And this is possible because there's so many contributors to Homebrew that whenever there's a new version of something, it's generally patched and updated in the Homebrew packages very quickly. And the upstream vendor fixes the vulnerability. And so all you need to do is run a Brew upgrade across your fleet, and we'll manage that for you. So that's kind of a high-level view of the product and how it relates to working locally. And kind of the last thing here is that everything that I've showed you today on the visibility side is available in Workbrew for free. So you can install it on unlimited users and unlimited devices. And only the remote management and security and compliance functionality is a paid functionality. So with that, I think I'm ready to move on to Q&A. And I have here just a QR code with a PDF of some, homebrew kind of odds and ends that you can use. If you fill out this form, you'll get the PDF immediately. We'll also send you an email. But more importantly, I will get your contact information and I'll send you a follow-up after this webinar. So yeah, I think we can move on to questions now.
Awesome. Thanks, John. That was great. And you'll be surprised to hear that I agree with all your points about local development. Yeah. So some things that
Not bias at all, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Some of the things that I was thinking about. So, one of the reasons I hear from people who like are investigating things like the cloud IDEs, is because, well, oh, hey, we all use a shared dev environment, and I think, you know, to your point, that's always, while it solves some problems, it adds other ones in terms of it not being ergonomic, to use your phrasing. So like, and obviously, I would say, in local stack, you don't need that, right? Like it's easier to work locally anyway. I think developers prefer to work locally than have to work on these shared environments anyway, and you avoid the collisions. I think that's another thing, even maybe not as necessarily related to homebrew, but like working locally, you can avoid some of those collisions when we're working on shared environments, which is where those usually end up leading. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember the days when we had kind of third-party services that we depended on in our web applications, and we had kind of shared environment variables with one account that was shared across like 10 or 15 developers, and we'd always be clobbering each other's settings and causing rework and all that kind of stuff. With regard to the cloud IDEs, there's always a trade-off. I
Yeah.
can very easily make the case for why a cloud IDE is a good idea, right? It's one place to manage everything. It's really, really simple, but there's a trade-off, and the trade-off is ergonomics. And I'm kind of the person who's like, why can't I have it all? Why can't I
Yeah.
have consistency, repeatability, reliability, security, but also it's ergonomic. It works on my machine. I don't have to ask for permission. It's really, really easy to use. And I believe that's possible. And that's what kind of this local development is about.
Yeah, totally agree. All right. So I'm going to try and because oh, whoops. Okay. Someone,
Oh, there we go.
we're overlapping each other. There, we got some questions from the audience. So, will any of this transfer to Windows as well, or is this Mac only? I'm assuming this all works as well with if you have WSL on.
Yeah, so
Windows.
basically, Homebrew support is primarily Mac. It works on Linux as well. And in Windows, if you're using Windows subsystem for Linux, you can use Homebrew there as well. As far as Workbrew is concerned, we have some security and compliance settings that are primarily utilized on Mac. They're built on top of some of the operating system level functionality. And so, to the extent that you have guardrails in place about limiting access to certain things, that doesn't really translate to Windows or to Linux, but the visibility functionality all translates perfectly, and you can manage you can view what's going on those devices, and you can run commands, and you can do configuration, but like limitations around guardrails is mostly a Mac thing.
Let's say I'm using Brew today. Does Workbrew act as a drop-in replacement? What's the onboarding friction for me?
So our goal is for it to be unnoticeable when you install Workbrew. So if you're an individual user, to install it, you would just double click a package and it would be installed and you'd be up and running. The more common way to deploy this is in a team environment. You usually have some sort of mobile device management or MDM solution like Jamf or Conji or Fleet. And the IT admin would deploy Workbrew out to your devices that way. When it's installed, what happens is we actually install Homebrew. If you have Homebrew installed already, we just upgrade your existing Homebrew installation. And when I say upgrade, what is really happening is we're installing the Workbrew Secure CLI, which is a wrapper around Homebrew. So anytime that you run a brew command, it will parse through Workbrew and then be passed on to the underlying Homebrew tool. So it should be transparent for developers.
Great. How does Workbrew translate to CI environments? Can you give examples?
So I think this is less about Workbrew and more about Homebrew. It's identical in both cases. The way it translates is if you're working on a local development environment and you have some things that are installed, maybe you're using like Ubuntu as your base image for your CI. And Ubuntu doesn't keep the latest version of everything available all the time. And you want those versions to be moving faster in your project. What you might do is in your CI instance, install Homebrew, and then install the latest versions of those packages on Linux via Homebrew so that they match your developer environments. Ah, okay, this is an interesting one. Did I lose your audio?
Oh, yes, you did. Sorry. There was a lot of sirens going on here, so I muted myself. My own fault. Amateur hour here. Sorry. What's the difference in your approach versus the one followed by Monkey and MacPorts? This is our last question here.
Yeah, it's hard for me to answer this. What I would say is that Homebrew is, its differentiator is that it was created in the time of GitHub being, coming to popularity, and the definition of all the packages, all the formula and casks in Homebrew are managed via an open source project. So it's very, very easy for people to contribute packages. MacPorts is kind of a predecessor to Homebrew. I think there were some things that were inspired by MacPorts in Homebrew. Monkey is more from like the IT space, less of a developer-oriented product. I don't have a ton of experience with Monkey, so I can't speak much more to it than that.
Okay, awesome. Well, this was really great. We really appreciate you joining us, John. And I'd love, maybe sometime in the future we can talk more about local development and just have like a chat about it, because I think there's a ton we could talk about on that topic, and I appreciated all of your thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, so we are going to move on to our second speaker of the day. I'm going to welcome Malcolm to the screen. So Malcolm is going to tell us about OpenInfraQuote, which I think, not to give anything away, it just launched like literally a week ago or something, maybe even sooner.
I released a V1 about 30 minutes ago.
30 minutes ago. So you heard it here first. All right.
Exactly.
This is great. I'm looking forward to this. All right. I'll let you take it away from here.
Thank you. And so I think I'm going to start with a bit of a demo so you can see what this does. And so OpenInfraQuote is a CLI tool that reads your Terraform plan and state files, and then it gives you a quote of how much that will cost you that month. So it's really useful to keep your cloud costs in line. And it's brand new. It just said release V1 about 30 minutes ago. So let's see a little demo of how it works, and then we'll switch over to a presentation to get more in-depth in there. So using local stack, I have this repository with my Terraform code in it. We're going to initiate it. I'll just pull down all my Terraform stuff, and then let's do a plan. So we'll create a plan from what is in this directory and output it to a plan file. And because we're using local stack, that will happen pretty quickly. And then we'll output that to a JSON file, because OpenInfraQuote reads in the JSON representation of a plan and a state file, because that's more stable. And then let's run it. Get that. So this is what an experience will look like. You feed it in your plan JSON, and you'll get your monthly summary here. So in this case, we can see the minimum price of that month will be $127, and the maximum price will be $187. And then because this is a plan, we also see the difference. So every resource in this plan is new. So we can see the difference is the same as the total. But if we had an existing state file and then a plan that, say, added one resource to it, you would see the total, and then the difference would be how much that change added or subtracted from that total. And down here, we can see the breakdown between our different resources, their name, what type they are, how much their minimum and maximum price is, and then what kind of change it was. So in this case, all of them are adds. We can also see JSON representation, which is really handy because then we can take this and we can feed it into something like OPA in order to put a limit on how much we can spend per month or how large a change can be or what types of resources are allowed. So we can see all that information is present here. So that's a little demo of showing how OpenInfraQuote works. So I'll switch over to presentation. One second. Great. So what is OpenInfraQuote? Well, as we said, it's open source, entirely open source CLI for Terraform cost estimation. And the reason we're making this at Terrateam is we manage your infrastructure or help you manage your infrastructure. And so that means we manage the plans and applies. And for a lot of people, seeing the price of a change, it's kind of the aha moment of what the value is in putting their infrastructure management into a GitOps workflow or any sort of really structured workflow. Not only can they see the change, but they can also track it over time. And previously, we've depended on other tools, but we've decided that this is an important enough tool that we should build our own. And also, it's something we think that should be free. So we want to give the tool we made away for free. So that's why it's open source. It's under an MPL license. And OpenInfraQuote is really focused on just pricing. So being an open source tool, we wanted to make it something we felt comfortable we could manage in the long term. So we've really narrowed the scope of what it does to just a pricing problem. So OpenInfraQuote doesn't directly come with any sort of policy management or RBAC or anything like that that is like a larger InfraQuote tool might have. It's really focused on just the pricing problem. So as we saw, the inputs here are your JSON representation of your plan or state. You can think of that what to price is the first input. The second input is our pricing sheet, which is a CSV file. And that defines how to match your resources to something that can be priced. And then finally, a usage file. One comes built in with OpenInfraQuote, but you can always add one yourself. And that says, for example, in S3 bucket, I generally do this many requests on it per month. So you can price me at that request volume. So then you can say how much is used. And the output is a quote for the monthly cost estimate of that plan or state file. And as we saw, we can get it in a text representation or JSON. The algorithm's pretty simple here, actually. We extract all the resources from your plan and state file. We walk the price sheet and just match those resources up to anything in the price sheet. And then we walk the usage file and we match those products up to the usage. And then we just compute the price, which is, it's a bit more complicated than this, but essentially it's usage times the price. This is where you can get it. This URL is going to come back in a second, so don't worry about typing it out furiously. So we separate out two operations. One is matching and the other one is pricing. And the reason we separate that out is because in order to price your resources, you might need to give OpenInfraQuote more information. For example, a common one is the region is not necessarily accessible from inside the state file or the plan file. So by default, OpenInfraQuote just says, I'm going to assume it's across all possible regions, and we'll get a range of it could cost at minimum this amount and at maximum that amount. But then you can feed it more information in the pricing step to say, well, I know it's going to be this region, so only price me at that region. So we separate them out so you can have all the matches there that are present and then choose to price it based on different scenarios or different parameters. So first step is match, where we take the price sheet and then we output the JSON. And then we price it. So the basic one, which gives you the text output, is just getting passing the matches JSON in to the price command. We can also specify the region here. That's how that would look. And we can specify an output of JSON. And we can also pass in our own custom usage, which is another JSON file. And in this way, you can say this particular S3 bucket gets this much traffic, so on. And as we saw, I just want to go over some of these. Well, we saw this in the demo, but in particular, you'll note that you get the min and max price and max diff for all these things. And like I said, OpenInfraQuote there's a lot of parameters that go into pricing something. So the more parameters you give it, the tighter this bound will get. So we can see in this case, we're giving it no extra information. And we actually have kind of like a wide bound on what the price could be. There's other things too, where even if we know what region it is, we still don't necessarily know how many requests a S3 bucket will have, or how much data will be stored on it. And imagine your service becomes incredibly popular one day, it gets posted on Hacker News, and your price, obviously, that you did earlier that week doesn't know about all this extra traffic it's going to get. So that's why it's a quote. You should think about it as it giving you the direction and rough magnitude that your change is going to have. But there are external forces that are outside what the information that is present in a Terraform planner state file that impact the price. And you can tune all of those to fit exactly what you want. So we saw before the range was 126 to 381. And then we specified the region, and we got a tighter bound of $127 minimum and $187 maximum. So what makes OpenInfraQuote different? There are a few other solutions out there. InfraCost is a well-known one, and then KubeCost, as well as they have an open source version called OpenCost. But what makes OpenInfraQuote different is it is 100% open source. The other ones, some parts of them are open source, or they are the smaller version of a commercial offering. And OpenInfraQuote is 100% open source, and it will always be open source. And that's one reason that we narrowed the scope down, because we want to be able to keep this pledge that we made about it being open source. Secondly, it's meant to be incredibly easy to use. So there's no server component, there's no API keys. All you need are these files that you download from the OpenInfraQuote website, and they're pretty small, they're not that large. So you do it all locally, no information ever leaves the machine that you ran it on. And so that's like, so if you're privacy aware or security concerned, or you just don't want to have to add another API key you need to manage and store somewhere, then OpenInfraQuote is a great choice. A core value at Terrateam is we really want to meet developers where they are, and that ideology goes into pretty much everything we do. We work very hard to make this differentiation we have called tooling versus like frameworks. We want to be able, the tools to be able to fit into your existing workflow. And so you can use it how you see fit, and you don't get a workflow forced on you. And OpenInfraQuote is no different. Being just a CLI, you can just put it into your existing Terraform or OpenTofu pipeline. And as long as you have access to the state or plan file, then you can add pricing to that. The design is also incredibly simple. So for example, InfraCost parses your code and tries to understand what it does. It does some variable evaluation and all that. So it's actually, it's a relatively complicated piece of software. And we decided that we wanted to make it very simple, straightforward. For example, OpenTofu is adding a lot of early variable evaluation functionality, which is great, very great from a developer perspective, but it's very hard to keep up with all that if you want to write a tool that can consume OpenTofu code. And we didn't want to have to be in a race to keep up with how much Terraform and Tofu change. we realized that the state and plan representations are pretty static. So you can add a lot of code functionality, and it doesn't really change how the plan and state files look. So that's why we chose them as inputs. It lets you use this across multiple versions without really without having to worry about a new feature getting in the way of if you'll be able to price your infrastructure. Additionally, there's tools like Terragrunt, which do a lot of complicated but useful processing beforehand. And with that, as long as you can get the plan or state file, it doesn't matter what wrapper you're using for Terraform or Tofu, you can always use OpenInfraQuote in that workflow. It's also really easy to add new resources to the price sheet. It's just a CSV. It has a pretty straightforward format. So if you have a product that you have a Terraform or Tofu provider for, and you want to be able to price it through OpenInfraQuote, then we can add that for you, no problem. It's very easy. You can even add it yourself and have your own pricing sheet that you want to use locally. So the current state is we support AWS. We don't have all of the services in there yet. We're working quite hard on getting all that there, but AWS is the primary cloud vendor that we're supporting. And we want to expand that out to GCS, Azure, and then moving on, pretty much anything that has a Terraform provider that you can infer the pricing from in some way, we would like to add to OpenInfraQuote. Just be able to price anything that you're managing through Terraform, as well as be able to integrate it into any CI/CD that you're using. That we want to be able to use anywhere by anyone without a lot of rigmarole in getting it going. So if they're interested, how can you help? Well, the main thing is you can run the match command against your plans and states and take that output and send it to us. Beware, there is information about your resource in there. The output is a JSON file. So look at that before you do upload it, because you just want to make sure you're not sharing anything that you would prefer not to. But all that match data really helps us improve the quality of matches that OpenInfraQuote does and give better pricing out of it. If you have a product that you know how to connect to a Terraform resource, send to us how to price that and how to connect it to a resource, and we can add it to the pricing sheet, and then it'll be in there for anyone to use. And then also please just use it and submit feature requests and bug reports. That's probably one of the most valuable things you can do. Pricing data is not simple. There's a lot of data wrangling. It's probably not surprising that AWS is not consistent in how it presents pricing data. So we have to take this very large inputs from AWS and GCP and Azure, and then turn them into a consistent way to figure out what Terraform resource set is. And it's a lot to work through. So if you run into any issues there, just please let us know. Or if you want some cool features, please let us know. And I'd like to thank LocalStack, not only because it made generating a lot of plans and state files very easy, rather than having to spend any money on AWS bill or just wrangle credentials and all that. You could just do it all in LocalStack locally. Really sped up development time. But also LocalStack helped develop the tool as well. There's a few commits from various LocalStack developers in there. Also, our lead developer on it was James Dennis. He did a great job. And really, it was not only building the tool, but wrangling, like I said, all this pricing data. It was just a lot to work through. If you look at the code output of OpenInfraQuote, the actual tool is less code than all the code he had to write just to manage and discover and explore the AWS pricing data. There's just so much there, and it's a lot to understand. So with that, you can get OpenInfraQuote now. You can scan this QR code that'll bring you to that URL. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Malcolm. That was awesome. I'm excited about this tool too because I think i- as you noted, the pricing on AWS is complex.
Yeah.
And even you have to go like into the service. There's always like all these exceptions and things like that. So it is really difficult to figure out. So I'm impressed that you all kind of have managed to do a lot of that work. So yeah, congrats to you on that and to your lead developer as well. So
Thank you, thank you. And even if you use the AWS pricing calculator, you kind of need like a PhD to even understand how to use it to its full functionality.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree with you there too. So I had a couple questions, and there was some questions from the audience as
Great.
well. So first of all, like I was curious, you mentioned the CSV file. So it sounds like by default, when you install this, it's going to pull a CSV files with whatever pricing that you all have already kind of figured out for us that we can then edit. Am I that correct? And like that's the kind of current setup, right?
Yeah,
Is
exactly. I mean, obviously, the hope is that the pricing sheet that you get from us just has everything you need, but certainly you can edit it.
okay. And what happens to like so at that point, let's say I add something to it, um like and I want to update it, like does that, like, if let's say you go in there and update the pricing, is there something somehow like this can stay in sync with whatever changes get added while still customizing it, or is that kind of maybe a feature for the future?
So for that, you can just, if you had your own pricing sheet CSV or your own modifications, what I would do is just concatenate that with the latest version of ours every time you want to update it, and then use that going forward.
Okay, okay, that sounds good. All right,
And of
so
course, send us back anything that is public that you would like pricing, and then it'll just be there.
awesome. um So I'm going to go to some questions from the audience. Some of these you kind of covered, but I'll give you maybe an opportunity to dig a little deeper. So first of all, how is it different from infra costs, for example?
I would say two big differences. One is while InfraCost does support the ability to price on your planner state files, the sort of default workflow they give you is to price based on your actual Terraform code, which is quite complicated. Um, and so our design is using a different input in order to price your resources. So that's a huge difference. The other one is InfraCost is really it's a full product with a company behind it. And so they have dashboards, guardrails, all these other tools connected to your pricing. Whereas OpenInfraQuote is just an open source CLI. Certainly you can add that, for example, with OPA, but really it's this confined scope of we just want to let you be able to price your resources, and then you can choose what to do with that data as you see fit. Additionally, OpenInfraQuote, or I mean, sorry, InfraCost has a server component. So you are pricing against using an API with API keys. Whereas again, OpenInfraQuote is purely local. No data ever leaves your server. You have all the information locally to do all of the operations with it.
Makes sense. Um, so the next question is, do you have any plans to make this a CI plugin? Which sound like you said you do.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely,
assuming
absolutely.
that you could, given how simple like it is to work, you could actually or like put in GitHub Action that runs the does some of that work, or something like that currently. But do you have plans to kind of make that more easily pluggable?
Yeah, definitely. We want some on the OpenInfraQuote website. You should be able to have tutorials on how to do all these things, and then have official, like official GitHub actions for it, and GitLab and all that. So we want to have all that. So it should just be like plug and play.
Awesome. All right. And then well, somebody asked about the other clouds. You already answered this question. I think, obviously you're planning on
Yep.
expanding AWS support as well as looking at Azure and GCP. support.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, really, it's the bottleneck here is so if you think about it, AWS did not define their pricing sheets in a way for you to easily connect those to Terraform. So Terraform has its own representation of AWS. AWS has its own representation of itself. And so the bottleneck is you really need a human to go through and make those connections. Like, okay, AWS calls this resource as this. This is all the different ways it can be priced. Now, what Terraform resources that connect to and what attributes are in that resource that a user defines that we can bring back to the pricing sheet to realize that these two things are the same thing. And it's just basically a labor intensive operation.
Yep, I agree. Okay. So, and then somebody else just wrote, "Congrats on the V1 release."
Thank
so
you very much.
share that with you. Okay. Well, this was great. I am actually looking forward to giving this tool a go myself and see how it works. So I really appreciate all the work you and your team did on it. And thank you for coming out here to share with us.
Yeah, thank you. And if someone just wants to give it a quick spin, just use local stack. It's really easy.
All right. Um, all right. Thanks, Malcolm. And thanks to everybody who joined us today. I really appreciate you coming out. And we'll be back again next month with some great talks. In addition, as I said at the beginning of this session, please be sure to check out our blog at blog.localstack.com because tomorrow we've got the 4.3 release coming. So you can find out all the cool features in the latest version of LocalStack coming tomorrow. And we always appreciate you joining our community. If you aren't already a member of our Slack community, please join our Slack community. You can find out how to do that as well. Well, there you go. Magically appeared on screen. So go to slack.localstack.cloud, join our Slack community, and be a part of the conversation there. So again, thank you. We'll see you next month. Bye.